I was elbow-deep in legal briefs when two men in what appeared to be police uniforms pounded on my front door. My golden retriever, Bailey, barked frantically as I set down my coffee mug and approached the door cautiously. Through the peephole, I could see two broad-shouldered men with badges pinned to their chests, faces stern beneath the brims of official-looking caps. "State Police! Open up!" one of them shouted. I hadn't done anything wrong, at least nothing that would warrant a police visit on a Saturday morning. But something felt off. After 15 years as a prosecutor and now serving as State Attorney General, I'd developed a sixth sense about these things. I cracked the door open, chains still in place. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The taller one stepped forward. "Mr. Mark Zimmerman? We have a warrant for your arrest for violation of Homeowner Association regulations." I blinked twice. "Excuse me? Arrest for HOA violations?" "That's right, sir. You'll need to come with us immediately." That's when I noticed the badges, cheap replicas with security stamped across them, not state police insignias. Their uniforms looked authentic at first glance, but the fabric was wrong, and the patches were clearly knockoffs. "May I see that warrant?" I asked calmly. The shorter officer hesitated before handing me a document. One glance told me it was complete nonsense, a poorly formatted letter with a fake judge's signature, and no official seal. This wasn't just ridiculous, it was illegal. "Gentlemen, I'm going to need you to wait right here," I said, closing the door and immediately dialing the real police. I knew exactly who was behind this: Gloria Davenport, our neighborhood HOA president. Ever since I'd moved into Oak Ridge Estates 6 months ago, she'd been on my case about everything from my mailbox height to the shade of white I'd chosen for my fence trim. What I hadn't told her, or anyone in the neighborhood, was that I wasn't just Mark, the new homeowner who worked in government. I was Mark Zimmerman, State Attorney General. I'd kept my position quiet because I wanted normal neighbors, not people who treated me differently because of my job. But Gloria was about to learn exactly who she was messing with. The day had started like any other quiet Saturday. I was catching up on work while enjoying the morning sunlight streaming through my home office window. Bailey had been dozing at my feet when her ears perked up seconds before the pounding on my door began. Now, as I explained the situation to the police dispatcher, I watched through my window as the fake officers shifted uncomfortably on my porch. 10 minutes later, 2 patrol cars pulled up with real officers, who quickly detained the imposters. I stepped outside to provide my statement, and that's when I noticed Gloria standing across the street, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold. Our eyes met briefly before she quickly turned and hurried back toward her house. "Sir," one of the real officers said, "these men claim they were hired by a Ms. Davenport to serve papers. They say they never claimed to be police." "I have a recording from my doorbell camera," I replied. "They explicitly identified themselves as state police and presented a fake arrest warrant." The officers looked at each other. "We'll need that footage, sir." "Of course," I said, pulling out my phone to access the video. "And while you're at it, you might want to bring Ms. Davenport in for questioning about impersonating law enforcement and filing false legal documents." As I showed them the video, I noticed one of the officers giving me a curious look. "Is everything all right, Officer Jenkins?" I asked, reading his nameplate. "Yes, sir, it's just, aren't you the Attorney General?" I smiled. "Yes, I am. But I'd appreciate if you'd keep that between us for now. I'd like to handle this situation as any citizen would." The officer nodded respectfully. "Of course, sir. We'll take care of these two and follow up with Ms. Davenport." As they led the fake officers to their patrol cars, I considered what Gloria's next move might be. This wasn't her first attempt to intimidate me, but it was certainly her most brazen. What made a seemingly successful, middle-aged woman resort to such tactics over petty neighborhood rules? I was about to find out that Gloria Davenport's HOA kingdom was hiding secrets far darker than unauthorized garden gnomes or improperly trimmed hedges. The fake officers were just the beginning. When I'd moved into Oak Ridge Estates, I was simply looking for a nice neighborhood close to the capital with good schools for my future visits from my nieces and nephews. As a single, 42-year-old workaholic who'd recently decided to put down roots, I hadn't anticipated getting caught in the crosshairs of an HOA tyrant. Within my first week, I received a welcome letter from Gloria listing 17 different violations that needed immediate attention, from the height of my mailbox, apparently 2 inches too tall, to the unauthorized vegetation in my backyard, native wildflowers I'd planted to support local pollinators. I'd complied with the reasonable requests but pushed back on others, citing the actual HOA bylaws I'd carefully read before purchasing. This seemed to infuriate Gloria, who wasn't used to homeowners who actually knew the rules. After the fake police incident, I decided it was time to dig deeper. Monday morning, I asked my assistant, Tina, to pull everything we had on Gloria Davenport and Oak Ridge Estates HOA. Everything legal, I assume? Tina asked with a raised eyebrow. Of course, I replied. Public records, court filings, property records. Nothing we wouldn't look at for any other investigation. By lunchtime, Tina had compiled an interesting file. Gloria Davenport, 52, had been HOA president for 9 years. During that time, the HOA had filed 37 lawsuits against homeowners, an unusually high number for a neighborhood of just 120 homes. More interestingly, the HOA had contracted exclusively with Pinnacle Property Management for all maintenance work, and Davenport Landscaping for all groundskeeping. Davenport Landscaping? I asked. Owned by her brother, Thomas Davenport, Tina confirmed. And get this, Pinnacle Property Management's CEO is her ex-husband, Richard Klein. That's quite the family business, I mused. Any financial records? HOA fees have increased 87% during her tenure, Tina noted, well above the average for similar communities in the area. And there have been 3 special assessments in the past 2 years totaling over $500,000. I whistled. For what purpose? Pool renovations, security upgrades, and road repairs, Tina read from her notes. Though residents have filed complaints saying the pool looks the same, there are no new security features, and only the road in front of Gloria's house was repaved. Now I was intrigued. Any formal investigations? Nothing official. A few homeowners tried to raise concerns at meetings, but according to minutes, they were ruled out of order and removed. I thanked Tina and spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing the materials. By evening, I had enough concerns to warrant a closer look, but nothing concrete enough for official action. I needed more information from inside the HOA. That opportunity came sooner than expected when I returned home to find a formal HOA violation notice taped to my door, demanding I appear before the board that Friday evening to address my continued non-compliance and dangerous interference with HOA's security personnel. I had to laugh at the audacity. Gloria was actually trying to use the HOA to punish me for having her fake cops arrested. This was going to be interesting. Friday evening arrived, and I dressed casually in jeans and a button-down shirt. I wanted to appear as just another homeowner, not the state's top law enforcement official. I tucked a small recording device into my pocket, perfectly legal in our one-party consent state, and headed to the community center. The meeting room was nearly full when I arrived. About 30 homeowners sat in folding chairs facing a long table where Gloria and 4 other board members sat in what could only be described as faux judicial pomposity. Gloria sat center, in a larger chair than her colleagues, a gavel resting before her. I recognized my next-door neighbor, Pete, who gave me a sympathetic nod. We'd spoken occasionally over the fence, and he'd warned me about Gloria's reign of terror. Meeting called to order, Gloria announced, banging her gavel unnecessarily. She was a striking woman with expertly highlighted blonde hair cut in an expensive bob, wearing a tailored blazer despite the casual setting. Her eyes, cold and calculating, scanned the room with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. After covering several mundane agenda items, Gloria finally reached my case. Now to the matter of violations at 47 Oak Ridge Drive, owned by Mark Zimmerman, she announced, fixing me with a stern look. Mr. Zimmerman, please approach the table. I stood and walked forward, feeling the eyes of my neighbors on me. Mr. Zimmerman, you've been cited for multiple violations, Gloria began, shuffling papers importantly. Most seriously, you interfered with HOA security personnel performing their duties on Saturday, resulting in a dangerous situation and costly legal complications for the association. I kept my expression neutral. Ms. Davenport, are you referring to the two men who impersonated police officers and attempted to serve me with a fraudulent arrest warrant? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Gloria's jaw tightened. They were security contractors delivering a notice of violation, she corrected. At no point did they claim to be police officers. I have video evidence proving otherwise, I replied calmly. They identified themselves as state police and presented a document purporting to be an arrest warrant. Both actions are felonies under state law. The room grew quiet. One of the board members, an older gentleman with glasses, leaned over to whisper something to Gloria, who waved him off impatiently. The HOA has the right to enforce its rules, Gloria insisted. You've been in violation of sections 3, 7, and 12 of the covenant since you moved in. Which specific violations are you referring to? I asked. Gloria looked flustered for a moment before recovering. Your mailbox exceeds the height restriction, you've planted unauthorized vegetation, and your fence trim color doesn't match approved HOA white. Actually, I said, pulling out a folder from my bag, I have documentation showing that my mailbox height is within the 1-inch variance allowed in Section 3.2. My native plantings are explicitly permitted under the Environmental Sustainability Amendment passed in 2018, and my fence trim is snowfall white, which is listed as acceptable in Appendix C of the color guidelines. The same board member was looking increasingly uncomfortable, while Gloria's face flushed red. Nevertheless, she continued, your actions on Saturday constitute interference with HOA operations, and the board recommends a fine of $2,500. Gasps came from several homeowners. This was an outrageous amount, even by HOA standards. Before we proceed, I said, I'd like to ask a few questions about HOA operations, if I may. This isn't a Q&A session, Mr. Zimmerman, Gloria snapped. We're here to address your violations. Actually, interjected an older woman from the audience. The bylaws state that homeowners have the right to question board actions during their hearing. She held up a dogged copy of the HOA rules. Gloria looked like she'd swallowed something sour. Fine. 3 questions. I smiled pleasantly. Thank you. First, could you explain why Oak Ridge Estates exclusively contracts with Pinnacle Property Management and Davenport Landscaping without a competitive bidding process? The color drained from Gloria's face. Those vendors have provided excellent service for years. And is it true that you have personal connections to both companies? The uncomfortable board member was now staring at his hands. Gloria's knuckles whitened as she gripped her gavel. That's not relevant to your violations, she said tersely. My final question then, can you explain the discrepancy between the $500,000 in special assessments collected for community improvements over the past 2 years and the lack of visible upgrades to the neighborhood? The room erupted in conversation. Clearly, I wasn't the only one who noticed the missing improvements. Gloria banged her gavel repeatedly. That's enough. Mr. Zimmerman, your fine stands at $2,500, due within 7 days. Meeting adjourned. She slammed the gavel down and stood up. As the crowd began to disperse, many neighbors approached me with their own stories of Gloria's questionable leadership. It seemed I'd struck a nerve that many had been afraid to touch. What I didn't expect was for a man to approach me as I headed to my car. He looked nervous, glancing around to ensure no one was watching. Mr. Zimmerman? I'm Eric Wilkins, HOA treasurer, he said quietly. We need to talk. Not here. It's about the special assessments, and much more. He slipped me a business card. Call me tomorrow. I can't be seen talking to you now. As he hurried away, I noticed Gloria watching us from the community center entrance, her expression thunderous. I had a feeling things were about to get much more complicated, and much more interesting. Eric Wilkins called me early Saturday morning before I could contact him. "Can we meet somewhere private?" he asked, his voice tense. "I have documents you need to see." We arranged to meet at a coffee shop 20 minutes outside our neighborhood. When I arrived, Eric was already seated in a back corner, a manila envelope on the table before him. He was in his 60s, with thinning gray hair and the nervous demeanor of a man who hadn't slept well. "Thanks for coming," he said as I sat down. "I've wanted to do something about this for months, but I didn't know who to trust." "About what exactly?" I asked. Eric glanced around before sliding the envelope toward me. "Gloria's been using the HOA as her personal piggy bank for years. When I became treasurer last year, I noticed discrepancies but couldn't get straight answers. Then I started digging. Inside the envelope were bank statements, contracts, and spreadsheets, all showing a pattern of financial mismanagement and potential fraud." "The special assessments?" I asked. "Only about 20% of those funds went to actual improvements," Eric confirmed. "The rest was diverted to overpayments to Pinnacle and Davenport companies, who then kicked back portions to Gloria through a shell company called GD Enterprises." "And the board allowed this?" Eric looked ashamed. "Most don't know. Gloria controls information tightly. Only 2 other board members are in on it, her friends Patricia and Kevin. The rest of us see doctored financial reports." I studied the documents carefully. "This is compelling, Eric, but we need more to build a case. Bank records for GD Enterprises, for starters." "I thought you might say that." Eric pulled out a USB drive. "These are copies of everything I could access. There's more, though. Gloria's been targeting certain homeowners, usually elderly or those who don't speak English well, with excessive fines and then placing liens on their properties." "To what end?" 3 homes have been forced into foreclosure in the past 2 years. All 3 were purchased at auction by shell companies that trace back to Gloria's business partners. They were renovated minimally and flipped for substantial profits. This was far beyond petty HOA tyranny. This was organized fraud and predatory business practices. I thanked Eric for his courage and assured him I'd look into it carefully. "There's one more thing," he said hesitantly. "Gloria knows someone's investigating her. At yesterday's emergency board meeting after you left, she was paranoid, talking about covering tracks and dealing with problems. I think she might be desperate." "Be careful then," I advised. "Don't do anything that might tip her off further." I spent the weekend reviewing Eric's evidence and consulting discreetly with trusted colleagues in the Financial Crimes Division. By Monday, I was convinced we had enough to open an official investigation, but I wanted to gather more evidence before Gloria realized the full extent of her trouble. I needn't have worried about keeping my investigation quiet, because Gloria made her next move that very evening. I arrived home from work to find a crowd gathered in front of my house. A large truck was parked in my driveway, and 2 men were removing what appeared to be my belongings. Pushing through the onlookers, I confronted the workers. "What's going on here?" "Eviction, sir," one replied, showing me papers. "HOA foreclosure for unpaid fines and fees." I snatched the document, scanning it quickly. It was a fabrication, a fraudulent court order with a judge's signature I recognized as forged. "This document is fake," I stated firmly. "Stop what you're doing immediately." "Sorry, sir. We have our orders." The man continued loading my couch onto the truck. "Who hired you?" I demanded. "Oak Ridge HOA, through Pinnacle Property Management." I pulled out my phone and called the police, then identified myself to the movers. "I'm Mark Zimmerman, State Attorney General, and you're participating in a criminal act based on fraudulent documents. I'd suggest you stop now before you face accessory charges." They hesitated, looking at each other uncertainly. At that moment, a black SUV pulled up, and Gloria emerged, striding toward us with confidence that quickly faltered when she saw me standing there. "There must be some mistake," she said, her voice falsely pleasant. "Mr. Zimmerman should have been at work." There's definitely a mistake, I agreed, holding up the fake foreclosure order. Specifically, forgery of a judicial document, breaking and entering, attempted theft, and fraud. Should I continue? Gloria's expression hardened. The HOA has legal authority to enforce its rules. The HOA does not have authority to create fake court orders or forcibly remove people from their homes without due process, I countered. And you, personally, don't have authority to embezzle over $400,000 in HOA funds. Her face went white. Behind her, police cars were pulling up, lights flashing. You don't know what you're talking about, she hissed. Actually, I do. And so will the forensic accountants who'll be examining Oak Ridge Estates books, along with those of Pinnacle Property Management, Davenport Landscaping, and GD Enterprises. Gloria's composure cracked completely. You can't do that. I can and I will, I said as officers approached. Gloria Davenport, you've made a serious mistake. Not just in your years of defrauding your neighbors, but in choosing me as your latest target. As the police officers reached us, I formally identified myself and explained the situation. Gloria was placed in handcuffs as neighbors watched in shocked silence. You'll need these as evidence, I told the officers, handing over the fraudulent documents. And you might want to secure the Oak Ridge HOA office before records start disappearing. As Gloria was led to a patrol car, she turned to glare at me. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I have friends in high places. I smiled calmly. So do I, Ms. Davenport. The difference is, mine actually uphold the law. The investigation that followed revealed the full extent of Gloria's schemes. Over 9 years, she had embezzled nearly $800,000 from the HOA through inflated contracts and kickbacks. Her predatory targeting of vulnerable homeowners had resulted in 7 forced foreclosures, all profitable to her network. And she'd accumulated personal wealth of over $2 million that couldn't be accounted for through legitimate sources. 6 months later, I stood before the reconstituted Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association, now led by Eric Wilkins as president, and a diverse board that actually represented our community. The HOA fees had been reduced by 40%, the oppressive rules relaxed, and a transparent bidding process implemented for all contracts. As your neighbor, I told the gathered homeowners, I want to thank you all for rebuilding our community on principles of fairness and transparency. Applause filled the room. Afterward, Pete approached me with a grin. So, Mark, now that the neighborhood tyrant is gone and you're no longer hiding your identity, will we be seeing more of you at community events? I laughed. Absolutely. Though I draw the line at being drafted for the HOA board. Don't worry, Pete assured me. We've implemented term limits. No more HOA dictators allowed. As I walked home that evening with Bailey trotting beside me, I reflected on how my quiet search for a peaceful neighborhood had turned into one of the most satisfying corruption cases of my career. Gloria Davenport had been sentenced to 8 years for fraud, embezzlement, and multiple counts of forgery. Her accomplices had received lesser sentences in exchange for cooperation. More importantly, homeowners who had lost their properties through Gloria's schemes were receiving restitution, and our community was healing from years of divisive rule. I reached my front porch and smiled at my perfectly imperfect mailbox, now legally 2 inches taller than Gloria would have allowed. Sometimes justice comes in unexpected forms, even in something as seemingly mundane as an HOA dispute. And sometimes, the neighbor you choose to intimidate turns out to be exactly the wrong person to cross.